Hi, everyone. It's Corey Hickson, your host for Talking to the Internet. I just wanted to take a quick minute before we dive into this week's show to say thank you. Listening and sharing means more than you know, and it helps others learn about the show. My hope is that this show provides value by entertaining you and educating you. If you find value in the show, please share it and review it. If you want to connect with me personally, I'm at Hicksonorous on Twitter, and the show is at TTTI Podcast. If you want to support the show even further, you can leave a tip or set up recurring support via the links in the show notes or on the website. Thanks again for listening, sharing, and learning with me. Now, on to this week's show. Welcome. This is Talking to the Internet. It is my privilege to have James Thomson on the show today. James is an indie iOS and Mac developer. For a group of the internet, he is known as the maker of Drag Thing and Peacock. For a different group of the internet, he is a frequent guest on the Incomparable Network. He writes occasionally, as he puts it, on his on a blog and different blogs, various blogs. And then from where I've known him the most was probably from the Clockwise podcast. That's where I got to know James. And then now, without a doubt, the way that I think of James in my head is from UK TPK, the Total Party Kill UK edition, which I laugh at pretty much every Monday as I listen to it on my drive home. It's a very fun time. So James, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really grateful to talk to you about talking on the internet and the human side of talking on the internet and why you do it and why you choose to put yourself out there in the ways that you put yourself out there. So thanks so much.
Well, thanks for inviting me on. You told me about a few of the other people you've recorded with so far, and I was like, it's nice to be in esteemed company.
Very much so. And you were the first, let's just say one of the first recommended guests to the show. So another one of the individuals that's been on the show formerly recommended you. So that's exciting as well. So thank you very much for heeding that call of being, taking up the charge of being the recommended guest. So that's awesome.
Well, no pressure now.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So you talk about in your Twitter bio, which we're going to get to your Twitter, right? Because there's a part about your Twitter that just kind of fascinates me, but we're going to get there. We're not there yet. You talking about being an occasional writer. What does that mean? When you say you're an occasional writer, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, I've had a blog on and off for years, and I've done stuff for, like, I wrote an article for iMore like 4 years ago or something, and I wrote some stuff before that for Jim Dalrymple's Loop magazine, just some short pieces, and I've done stuff in the past, but I don't think I get to call myself a writer just because I can occasionally write. But it's something that I like. With all of these things, I enjoy doing it, and I seem to have some ability to do it, but whether it's the best use of my time is an open question.
Based on what criteria? Like, when you say the best use of your time, how do you evaluate that?
Well, okay, I mean, there's a lot of, this comes into a much bigger question, is like, what do I do with my day? Because, as you said, I'm an indie developer. I have been for 20 years. Used to work for Apple before that. And I basically, well, I should also say, I have my own company, which I run with my wife. She also formerly of Apple. But it's now that I'm an independent developer, it's like, get up in the morning and pretty much I can do what I like. Well, that's not true. I make my own hours, let's put it that way. And it's like, what is the best use of my time from a professional level, in terms of, what product am I going to work on? What feature of that product am I going to work on? Am I going to make something new? What am I going to do? And then what's the best use of my time from a personal level in terms of I'm not working and I'm, relaxing and hobbies and things like that. And so it's some of these things that we're going to talk about kind of fall between two categories. Is this work? Is this a hobby? Is this fun? Is this, so best use of my time is an increasingly important question in my head as I sit there. What should I do at this moment in my life? It's a very deep philosophical question.
Well, yeah, best use of your time is especially interesting when you're sitting, giving your time to, a very new, very, fledgling show. So I appreciate you thinking that this might be not just not the best use of your time. I won't go that far, but an okay use of your time. So thank you for doing that.
Don't put yourself down. I mean, I think it's everyone has to start somewhere. It's not a huge hardship to sort of switch on a microphone and just chat to somebody for an hour.
So have you ever thought about taking your occasional writing, right? So the way I think about talking to the internet, right, is there's writing, there's podcasting, there's making YouTube videos, there's doing screencasts. There's a bunch of different ways that we can talk to the internet. Have you ever thought about taking that and, your primary daily job would be developing the applications that you develop, right?
Yeah.
But have you ever thought about doing that in terms of a freelance fashion where, you freelance write for an outlet?
The thing is, it's with a lot of these things, I know I can do it and it's easy to do one-off things, but when you have to say do a story every week or, every month, or you have a fixed deadline, and then it transforms from being this is a fun thing that I can do to this is a thing I have to do and I have to do it by this Friday. It changes the dynamics slightly. And I mean, we'll get into it, but as kind of one of the reasons I think that I don't have my own podcast as such, and I'm just a guest on frequently on other people's podcasts, but I get to have the fun bit, but I don't necessarily have to do the sort of it hasn't become a job yet.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to ruin your hobbies, is to turn them into work. Sorry that you've started a podcast, but it's and I mean, honestly, I don't know that I'm good enough to do it on a regular basis. But I just I don't know that the writing side of stuff. I mean, I enjoy doing it, but there's a lot of things that I can do, but I think it takes me, twice as long as somebody else to do it, so I can do these things, but I don't know if it's the most efficient way of, well, certainly in terms of work, say generating an income, because for me, that's, sit down, write code, that's the easiest, turning my time into an income thing.
Yeah.
If I was to try and do, podcasts, I mean, an example, I've done a number of conference talks, and I did one last year. It's called An Illustrated History of Easter Eggs, sort of tracking Easter eggs, mostly in Apple platforms over, the last sort of 30, 40 years or whatever. Hidden things in software. And the most famous was the author of the game Adventure hid his name in a secret part of the game. And just because he wanted credit, and Atari wasn't giving him credit. Anyway, the thing was, I did that talk, and, it's very nice to be asked to speak at conferences. And I hadn't done one for a few years, and, I'll get back to why I started on podcasts and conferences and speaking and all this sort of thing in a bit. But anyway, I was asked to do this, and I thought, okay, I've got an idea. I've got a reasonable idea for doing this. And I then spent 6 weeks doing the research and building the slide deck and writing the talk and stuff for a half-hour talk. And, this was possibly the least wise use of those 6 weeks in terms of, you know, a business perspective. But it was really fun to do and to do all the research and stuff. But there is this kind of like, when you work for yourself, it's like you need to balance that. You need to balance the doing stuff that has to be done to, you know, to generate an income, to, you know, keep the lights on. And then there's, if you have the time, doing other stuff that enable you to be a bit more creatively fulfilled if the main stuff doesn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you say that's a big driver for why I'm interested in doing this show and why I've wanted to create this show is, one, you know, I'm trained as a PhD, but I'm at a teaching focused institution right now as my daily job. And it's not that I don't have the ability to scratch the creative or the research itch, but it's not a primary portion of my job. My primary portion of my job is to teach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's to teach my subject area, and that's great and that's good. But there's still that piece of like, oh well, I really want to learn and I really want to think about these things in different ways, and then I want to talk to people, and so it's just kind of, it's interesting that you put it that way. Did you listen to the most recent ATP? Have you listened to it yet?
I haven't yet. No, we'll come back to that again. I keep saying we'll come back to things, but yeah. I have, you know, like I have so many friends who do really great podcasts, and I have very limited ability to listen to podcasts because when I'm writing code, I can't listen to people talk because
I get that. Yep.
I think that's, you know, something to do with linguistic centers of your brain or something like that, but it just does not work for me. If somebody's talking to me, whether it's a real person or a podcast, I can't focus, and I need to be in this like absolute Zen place, especially when I'm trying to do some debugging task and you're like 30 levels down in some piece of code, and then any sort of distraction, and then you have to just completely start again because all that state has fallen out of your brain. So I can, and because I work from home, you know, I don't have a commute, so I tend to listen to podcasts in the shower.
Yeah.
And I listen to podcasts as I go to sleep, which is not a comment on anybody's podcast in particular, but some people have a really calming voice, and I just sort of drift off listening to somebody talk. And so other than that, my podcast listening availability is quite small. So yeah, I try and like, there's things that I will listen to more likely if I listen to a live recording. So Upgrade with Mike Hurley and Jason Snell is a good example of that. Because I'll hop into the chat room and I can sort of, at least, you know, if there's some technical discussion or something going on, I can throw in my 2 cents on it and, you know, give some, you know, I feel a bit like I'm taking part a bit more, you know, if I'm in that. And that's one of the things I like about podcasts, or I like about podcasts with people I know, is that it's a way to keep, you know, in touch with them to a certain extent.
Well, and that's funny because that's probably, that might be the first time I ever heard your name, right? Was somebody was doing a show and then it was like, oh, James Thomson in the chat room says blah, 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 blah. Like so you were commenting, you were talking to the internet through somebody else's like formal live show that was happening. So the reason I bring up ATP is because they just had a conversation about, you know, COVID-19 and coronavirus and, you know, whether or not these big conferences should happen. And, you know, they were talking about the pros and cons of the actual conferences. And Marco, I think it was Marco, went on a big spiel about how, you know, you do all this thing and you prep for this talk and you put all this time into it and you put all this effort into it. And then there's 200 people in the room and maybe they recorded it. And if they recorded it, maybe the quality's good. And if the quality's good, maybe it makes it to the internet, you know. And it's like, and like anymore, there are all these other mechanisms. There's blogs, there's Twitter, there's, you know, YouTube, there's podcasts, there's all these other mechanisms to where you can reach people really well that isn't a conference. But then there is that human piece, right? Like there is that piece where you go there and you're actually face to face with somebody and you're goofing and you're laughing and you randomly all decide to go somewhere and grab some food, and that's where you build those strong friendships. But it was interesting to me to hear you today about creating the the presentation and taken 6 weeks, and it's like, is that really the best use of your time when you could do other things and reach much bigger audiences?
Yeah, I mean talking about like WWDC and things like that, it's like these days all the sessions are streamed anyway, so or at least they're recorded if not streamed live. So when I go to the conference, even if I've got a ticket to get into actual WWDC, I don't go to sessions because I can watch that later. The only reason generally to go to sessions is to see the names of the people who are giving a particular talk, so that who to go and track down. But for WWDC, the value 100% is going to the labs and talking to the engineers, like who are actually building the particular functionality that you might be using in the operating system. And also then it is those face-to-face relationship building interactions. There's many conferences, like the UL conference that was in Ireland. When I went to that, I think it was the 2016 one I talked at. That was great because you're like, this was they'd taken over an entire sort of health spa resort place in the south of Ireland. And so there was, I don't know, couple of 400 people all there for this conference. So you're kind of like, literally everyone there, once you've given your talk, everyone knows who you are. So you have all these conversations, all these interactions. And I made a ton of friends out of that, people that I've kept up with since then. And that's the thing that I'm going to miss the most is the actually, there's people that I know that I talk to on a regular basis, but that I don't physically see except maybe once a year, once every 2 years. And being able to just sort of hang out and have some downtime and, go out for a drink or a meal or whatever with these people is the kind of what's missing. But, as we are talking, we're kind of, things are getting more and more serious, it seems, on the coronavirus front. So I think when Apple does cancel WWDC, or they won't cancel it because they haven't announced it, but when they sort of...
exactly.
When they say, we're going to transition to being an online event and we're going to do these things differently, because they've always done a lot of it, a lot of the content has been available online. So when they do that, that will be good from all the developer side of things. But it will be a... I'll miss seeing some of my friends. But it makes sense, I think, at this point, not to ship 5,000 people and 2,000 engineers around the world. And I think the open question on that is really, are all these companies who decide to skip this year for conference season, are they going to say next year, well, let's go back to the way it was? Or are they going to say, well, we didn't actually... It
worked out pretty well.
We didn't have a conference. It worked out very well. We saved ourselves millions of dollars. Everybody coming saved millions of dollars. Is this the beginning of the end of the conference season? Which, would be a good thing, especially for the planet, but a bad thing possibly for people who, I talk to so many people who like hear all these stories of these meetings and like random things happening, just making this random contact that turns out to be really important or, influential in your career or whatever. And people aren't going to have that, maybe not have that opportunity. So yeah, it's one of those kind of odd things. I mean, I just got back some artwork for what was probably going to be some WWDC merchandise that I was thinking about. And it's like, well, it's some really nice art and I will find a use for it somewhere, but I'm probably not going to have any t-shirts or anything, or stickers to give out at WWDC because, I don't think it's going to happen.
One of the things that I didn't expect to come into it, and this is why I love, conversations with people, is you do development, right, on the Apple platform, and you get a lot out of going to these things and going to the labs and talking to the engineers at Apple about specific things or about general things that are going to help you. how could they, meaning Apple and other companies, where, you know, back when there's a smaller number of people who are developing for you, it's probably a little bit easier to manage. But when the App Store takes off and you know, you start getting millions of developers, you have to turn to more mass scale communication, right? So when they're thinking about talking to the internet, and the internet in this case being the developer community, right? Like, how could they do a better job talking to you to help you do what you do every day?
Well, I mean, a big question. I think they need to. So WWDC, typically you'll get the engineers who are writing the stuff on stage giving a presentation about what they're working on. So if it's some new feature of the operating system, it's generally somebody from the team that's working on it who will give the talk. Apple also has so a developer relations group, which is, you know, includes people who, you know, if you have a very specific problem, you can write in and you can say, can you help me solve this? And you get a limited number of goes at doing that per year. But, you know, that's kind of like the developer technical support folk are very good at helping in that sense. There's also a documentation group, which, you know, writes up, you know, this is how the API should work, which is not necessarily how the API does work, but, you know, there's kind of, there's all these different groups. And I think the thing would be to fund the developer relations and the documentation people more, so that there are, you know, there's, because I think they always have limited cycles to deal with people, and, you know, limited time to write documentation on everything and so on. And, you know, Apple's $1 trillion company. It should put more money into that side of developer relations, in my opinion. You know, just to allow them to do more of a job, so that there's more that can be more reference material and things like that, to replicate the kind of the one-to-one relationship stuff when you know, like when you actually get to talk to somebody. I have no idea how you do that. I mean, you know, like, sure, there are things like, you know, you can have microphones and FaceTime and things like that. You could talk to people across the internet. That's not the problem. The problem is if you have 1 million people who want to talk to one person, it just doesn't scale. And I don't know how you do that. And I mean, WWDC has always been a sort of, it's been weird because I've been going to WWDC since, on and off, since 97, I think. And there was a point where, you know, Apple developer folks would phone you up and say, do you want a discounted ticket? Because we haven't, you know, sold enough tickets. And now, you know, the conference, well, there was a point before they moved to the lottery system, there was a point where the conference, you know, they put the tickets on sale and it would be like Taylor Swift or something, you know, tickets would sell out within 90 seconds. And only 5,000 people got to go. And increasingly it's been extremely expensive, especially, you know, the hotels and travel and accommodation and stuff. So you're talking, you know, many thousands of dollars, especially if you're coming from overseas. So it really limits the amount of people who could be there. So, you know, it's one of those things. It's like, I personally, you know, will miss that kind of thing. But if something arrives that's a bit more democratic and giving more people access to those kind of things, I think that would be better for the community as a whole.
Makes sense. All right, let's get to what I thought was interesting. As I was learning about you and as I continue to learn about you, I follow you on Twitter. I looked at your profile and I'm scanning around, I'm looking at things, and I see that you have tweeted 76,885 times at the time that I looked at this. I would imagine it's more now. You want to talk about talking to the internet, right? I mean,
well, okay,
76,000. So, like, if we think about it, you know, 140 characters. Let's say you use them all every time. That's a lot of writing. That is a lot of writing.
Yeah, but I think there's a large number of those tweets. Well, there's going to be tweets which are, people who tweet at me for some technical issue with my software or whatever. So there's replies. So you can probably discount half of those because there's going to be replies to people saying, how do I do this? Or, something like that. And, I don't call that writing. Really, I mean, occasionally I come up with what I think is a pretty good tweet, but it's not 76,000 of them. Also, and I worked this out, I've been on Twitter for 12 years, so that's like less than 20 tweets a day. So if you factor in if there's something like a live event and I'll be live tweeting over it, that'll be like 100 tweets in an hour. So that biases it a bit. So, I think that's probably, we'll call that, 10 tweets or less a day. And that's not too many. I think
I agree.
It's that I don't think of Twitter as like this great weight on my shoulders of, well, I mean, it's a weight on shoulders for many people for many reasons. Twitter is a terrible place, but it is for me personally. It's generally been a nice experience once I started muting and blocking everything that I didn't want to hear about. But it's not like emotional burden is not the right phrase, but if you know what I mean, it's not something that weighs on my shoulders that it's like, I've got to keep up my my tweets today and come up with at least 3 interesting things to say or whatever.
I've met people that are like that, right? It's like, what's the interesting thing I can throw on Twitter today? Like, what's the thing that's gonna go viral today? And it's like, wow, what a burden. Like they have to be walking around life thinking like that. Oh man.
I mean, there are people like all this stuff. The sort of, it's only tangentially related to my income in that I make a product and I sell a product and people hopefully buy it, and everything else is kind of like, Twitter definitely helps me, and I have a reasonably large following on Twitter. I mean, it's like whenever you talk about Twitter following it or Twitter follower numbers, it always feels weird because you're either sort of saying, hey, look how important I am, or you're like, oh yeah, I'm really important, and then people go, you have just a small number of followers. It's not really impressive if you compare it to somebody else. And I try not to do that, but it's like when you look at some of your friends and you think, oh, I don't know how many followers like somebody like Marco has, but it's probably in 6 figures. And it's like, well, that doesn't mean that, I've got 16,000 followers on Twitter, probably half of which are bots, but there's a lot of people who follow what I say, and it's a bit intimidating and a bit sort of, if you actually think of a room containing that number of people, that's always my metric for this. And it's like, it's like, 12,000 people watched this talk when it was on YouTube. That's like a sort of medium-sized auditorium for, selling out a gig or something. That's kind of scary. But, but if you look at somebody and they have like 10 times the followers you have, that doesn't mean that they're 10 times better than you, or, you're 10 times worse than them, or anything like that. And a significant number of people who follow me such that I don't want to be just tweeting nonsense all the time.
Oh, of course. And
I feel a certain amount of, if there's something happening in the developer community, like a good example is like trying to put pressure on Apple because there's been a bad decision made about some app review thing to some smaller developer. If I can use my platform to kind of give it some more visibility, that's a good use of, having that sort of slightly larger follower number. But, if you look at people, there's people like John Gruber or somebody who's probably, 300,000-400,000 followers, people like that. And, if you look at folk like CGP Grey, who has many, I think millions of subscribers on YouTube and things like that. They're in a completely different world than the world I'm in. But I'm probably in a completely different world than quite a lot of people. Well, I wasn't going to say you. That
you could say it because it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like there's always somebody bigger and more important than you, which is kind of like a lesson at whatever level you are in life. And if you're at the top of that there is nobody more important than you, then you're clearly in a world that I just do not understand. And it's it's kind of like, I think all you can do is really try and lift up the people who have a smaller number of followers and things, and try and people will do that to you as well. So it's kind of like try and help those who you can help. It is really, I think, what these platforms are for. The problem with Twitter is, I'm a sort of straight white male, middle-aged guy. I don't get harassed really on Twitter, and it's hard because there's a lot of people who do, and women and other minorities particularly. And so if Twitter is the one place where you can like maybe do these sort of business deals and things that aren't happening because we aren't meeting face to face, then it's a problem, because those people might not have the same opportunities and things, or they can try and have these same opportunities and then mobs of people on Twitter have a go at them, and that's terrible. But yeah, for me, Twitter has been generally a reasonably good experience, and I think it's been useful in to use a terrible phrase, building my brand.
Of course.
And which is useful, if you're trying, like I sell, my main product is a calculator. I have another app which I started fairly recently, which is a D&D dice rolling app called Dice by Peacock. Peacock being my main product, which has existed for, I worked it out recently, I think it's 28 years at this point.
Wow.
But so the Dice by Peacock thing came out of the Total Party Kill podcast that we were talking about. But when I'm trying to get some interest in those things, Twitter and things like that is very valuable, and being a sort of known person in the iOS developer community is definitely helpful, and that's, I think, one reason why I go on podcasts, because it does help me be more visible, and helps me, have a day job and be able to afford to do the things that I do. But a lot of this stuff, the sort of podcasts, social media and things, it's because I work from home, and, I don't have that office environment around me that, when you realize, I haven't actually left the house in 4 days or whatever it is. And then you go outside and there's this weird, overwhelming sense of lots of people. And you think, this doesn't seem good.
I saw a tweet yesterday, and forgive me if you retweeted it and I saw it through your feed, but it was somebody saying, with the whole COVID-19 thing, that they were going to be trapped in their house for a week or two, never not going outside and and they were like, I'm an indie developer. I sit in my house all day, every day.
I've been training for this for 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. One of the things that's interesting is you talked about using Twitter for product support and technical support, right? And I hadn't thought about the resource that mechanism of talking to the internet could be, right? Because I'm assuming you do all your own support.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine getting a flood of emails would feel like a gigantic weight on your shoulder, where being able to split that up between different mechanisms, and, if I send you a request on Twitter, I don't want to say there's a lower expectation, but it might be easier for you to respond to that in a very concise manner, where the formality of email would make it, what's a 10-second tweet to address an issue is a 2-minute email, and that adds up over time. So I hadn't thought about you using Twitter to talk to your customers and to talk to people who are interested in your app. Like, that's a really interesting use of that mechanism. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't something that I kind of consciously did. It just happened, over time. And I probably, the amount of email I've got has dropped dramatically since the App Store came along. And I don't know why exactly, but there's a sort of, now that there's like Apple as a kind of gatekeeper between the creators and the people buying the stuff, because we don't get any, if you buy a copy of my app on the App Store, I have no idea. I don't get your name or email address or anything like that, which we used to get in the olden days when we sold directly or used a service like Kagi, which was a payment processor. So there's this kind of slight disconnect between the customer and the developers now, and I think that might have led to less emails or something. I'm not sure exactly the reason, but I do the support stuff, but it's generally I'll do that in an hour or so in the evening, or do a little bit as the day goes along. But it's not a huge burden, and most of my Twitter is just me posting whatever is happening in my life at the particular moment. But it's mostly commenting on things in the Apple community.
Yes.
And I think and occasionally politics when I'm really frustrated, but I try not to post political stuff on Twitter because it's either going to alienate people or the people that are reading it are of the same mind anyway, and it doesn't help. Yeah. But sometimes you just need to, vent about things, and we're in an interesting time for politics right now, if I can put it that way. But I will also, if there is some cause which is a good one, I will try and use my platform for some good in like fundraisers and retweeting things like that. But I don't think I can claim to be apolitical. If I'm sort of retweeting a variety of things which are clearly political in nature. But yeah, it's an interesting thing when you're kind of doing this, and like the boundaries, I think, is an interesting thing with podcasting and podcasters and social media people and influencers and all this thing. It's like, where is the line between personal and work, and between how much do you put into the world? And because I think that's one of the things that I think people like about podcasts is that sense of knowing the person a bit. Even if that person doesn't know you back, it's kind of, it's a bit of a one-sided relationship. But you're like, you have this. I have this sense that there's these people that I've listened to on podcasts for years that I've never met and I don't know, and I probably never will. But if I ran into them, I would think, this is a person I'd like to have a drink with or a chat with or whatever. They have no idea who I am whatsoever. But I've listened to hundreds of hours of them talking, and so I feel that I know them. Yes. And I probably don't know them because some of this is they may not talk about certain aspects of their life or whatever. But it becomes, I think, increasingly weirder when you have people who are like personalities, and like I'm not in this situation really, but it's a case of how much do I manage, especially if you have very large following. Like I know people who like won't take a picture out their window because that will reveal to the world where they live.
Yeah.
Because people will sit and triangulate, positions and say, oh, there's that landmark there, there's that landmark there, so I think that they live here. And that was like the weirdest experience I had, which is the only thing like this, is I was on Twit on the This Week in Tech as a panelist, and I went out my house the next day, and there was a guy in a car on my road, and he sort of beckoned me over. And usually in this situation, the person will say something along the lines of, oh, can you tell me where so-and-so street is, or whatever. So I went up to him expecting that conversation, and the guy just said, I just watched you on Twit yesterday. And I was like, okay, this is weird. I've been recognized at conferences. That happens, if like I'm at WWDC or some other conference, and I'm running around wearing a PCAL t-shirt, people will say, are you James Thomson? Fair enough. But this was like being recognized just in my civilian clothes on the street, on my street, in fact. And it was like, oh, this is weird. And it's like, I just came out of my house. Did that person see where I came from? Do they now know where I live? I mean, it's very nice. And the guy was, just had a brief interaction, but it was really strange. And I can't imagine what it must be like. I mean, I've been out, I was in a restaurant with, let us say, a large number of tech podcasters whose name you will know. And like the manager of the restaurant basically came over to the table and said, are you so-and-so? And it was just like, that's just so strange, because in the middle of like, I mean, this was in Austin in Texas, but it's sort of I can't imagine what it must be like to actually be a real celebrity, as opposed to, I just sort of cosplay as a celebrity, I think.
You play one on TV,
yes,
right?
Exactly. I'm in no way a celebrity, and if I ever say that I'm a celebrity, you can point out to me my hypocrisy. But it's just so strange. But yes, so that was my one experience of that, of kind of being recognized, and how odd it felt.
I always try to keep that in mind, right? So if you've ever been in the airport and you've like randomly seen, whoever, like you're talking about, big name, crazy celebrity, I always think, okay, this has got to be so weird if you walk up and you're like, oh my gosh, it's you, da 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 da, and they're like, yes, it's me, and I'm trying to fly on a plane.
Yes,
because I'm also a normal human being who has to go places and do things, and I'm flattered, but really I just want to fly on my plane. Like, I just want to listen to whatever I'm listening to, watch whatever I'm watching, and just fly on my plane. So I always try to remember that, like, they're a normal person, right? They just happen to do a thing that means they have 1.5 million followers, or that they're super in the public eye, kind of a deal.
So the example of this recently, so Mark Miller, who's a comic book writer, he's written a number of fairly famous things. He lives in and around Glasgow, and I saw him going into a toy shop with his presumably young daughter, very close to my house. And I saw him and I thought, no, you're here with your family, you're doing family things. This is not the point where I'm going to go up to you and say, oh, I really like your work, or whatever it is I was going to say to him. And it's just like, let the man have his Saturday morning. He can just, and sometimes you'll see somebody and you'll kind of like just give them a nod, in a kind of like, I know who you are, I appreciate your work, but I'm not going to hassle you. But I mean, sometimes I think it might be nice for people to, especially if it depends on the situation, because as you say, if you're in an airport or you're in a random shop or something, or you're trying to have a meal with somebody, you don't really want people coming up. But
Yeah.
if you're at a like a Comic Con or something like that, I've seen. This is a tangent. Um, the One of the things about Twitter that I've found quite interesting is, especially for people who clearly run their own Twitter accounts. I mean, I'm not talking big celebrities who have a team of social media folk who are doing stuff. But, if you have as like a medium scale, what in my mind is a celebrity, but like somebody, say, to use the comic book example, you have somebody who writes comics and they have a Twitter following that's probably similar to like what I've got, and you start to think about it and you think, wait, these are humans. All these people who make these things that you think
Yes.
of are as like these untouchable like super celebrities. They're they're actually human beings like us. And
Yes.
one of the things that's odd, if you go to a Comic-Con, like a proper one, like not the sort of TV and movie things, but the things where you have artists and writers of comics. There's always queues for the artists. There's never queues for the writers. Because, the artists, people, I think, resonate more with the art. I mean, I'm looking up above my desk. I have a whole bunch of signed comic art from various artists that I like on my wall. But nobody kind of talks to the writers. So if you go to a Comic-Con, you will see these people generally sitting there at a desk, maybe chatting to the people on the desks either side of them that they know, because all of these things, it's like the Apple developer community and the comics writer and artist community. Everybody knows each other and they meet each other at conventions and chat away. Anyway, but you see them sitting at a table on their own and they're really happy for people to come up and say, I love your work, and have a good conversation with them. And generally, because there's not queues, you can have a proper conversation. One of my favorite writers who's written the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl comics is Ryan North, and I think he's one of the cleverest writers in comics. And he was at a local Comic-Con around here. I had probably across the course of the day that I was there, I probably had a 45-minute conversation with him. And it was like an actual two people talking to each other with no sort of imbalance in relation, as it were.
Yeah.
And it was just really nice. And it was like, hey, this guy's a human being. I like him. He now follows me on Twitter. He occasionally likes some of the jokes that I make. And there is a sort of democratizing thing of that the being able to talk to somebody who makes something and to realize that they are, they have a day job. It's, you might have a different kind of day job, but it's still a job. And it's nice to have those interactions sometimes and kind of remind yourself that, especially, like occasionally, if I'm very frustrated at something in iOS or some developer thing that I'm doing, and if I tweet something negative about this feature or whatever, it's not impossible that the person who worked on it actually reads that and feels a bit bad about themselves or whatever, that I have trashed their work that they've been working on for many years. And I've had that occasionally happen to me where because I've of course got various vanity searches set up on Twitter that will just tell me if somebody's, talking about my products, which is useful if, somebody's tweeting about PCalc and hasn't directly tweeted it at me or at the PCalc Twitter account, and I can see that they've said something or whatever. But, occasionally I'll see somebody say something mean about me and I'll feel bad. But, if I trash something and somebody reads that and feels bad, that's not good. You're putting negativity into the world, and it's not a good thing to do. So keeping in mind that all the people who are working on this stuff, Apple is like, I don't know how many employees Apple has these days, but it's got many tens of thousands of employees, but there are actual humans in there making stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was one of the things. Like John Siracusa of ATP, who I would consider a friend now. He wrote, when I worked at Apple, I worked on the Mac OS X dock and the Finder. And he wrote a review of the dock that I had done. And I didn't see that review at the time. I saw it probably 10 years later. And I'm so glad that I didn't see it at the time, because it was a scathing review. It was an accurate review. I mean, don't get me wrong. And my version of the dock never shipped. It's a long story. You can hear it on various things that I've talked about. But
Yes, sir.
But yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing of reading this really damning critique of my work and thinking, I'm so glad that, I read this with 10 years of distance between that point and now.
Well, and you've pegged on something that is a large motivator for me to do this show, right? Is I hear all these individuals talk, or I watch YouTube channels, and I see them putting out content on the internet, right? And you don't really necessarily get, because it's not the venue for it, right? Like, you don't really get the why are they doing it, or the human side of who they are, right? And they are, like, they're humans. Like, when they click end on the record button, whatever it is, whether it's a microphone or whether it's a video camera, or whether they hit publish on the blog, they go back to dealing with, I'm hungry and I need a drink, or I have family upstairs, or, this thing's happening or that thing's happening. And it's like, I wanted to get into more of why that is. So I appreciate you saying that. And it's a natural transition in us to think about. So I primarily know your content through podcasting, right?
Yeah.
Through The Incomparable, through Clockwise, through Total Party Kill, those type of things. Why did you do it? What got you into it? What made you even start doing those things?
Okay, I mean, it is a really simple answer to that. And it's basically, I've had a lot of sort of social anxiety, and sort of the thought of standing up in front of a room full of people and talking was just completely terrifying to me. And I decided at this point, something like 6 or so years ago, that I would try and fix that, because I'm a programmer. I like to debug things and fix things. So it's like, how do I fix this? And it's like, well, the only way to really get over that is to stand in front of a room of 500 people and give a talk, or, talk on the internet. And I'm way better at it now than I was, to the point where I actually enjoy giving talks. Like the one that I did most recently, the Easter egg one, that was a lot of fun. And I did that talk twice. I did it in Canada at NS North, and I did it at Hacking with Swift Live in the UK. And it was a fun talk to do. And, I still, had some slight nerves before getting up on stage, but I think most people would. But even in the podcasts, like I've done some live podcasts, like I did a couple of live Clockwises. Clockwise is the most stressful podcast because you have like a very limited window to sort of get your point across, because everything is sort of timed out, and you can't talk too much, you can't talk too little. You have to get it exactly right. The other one, which was a recent thing for me, was The Incomparable has some game show, quiz show type things on it, and doing those is another level of terror, because you're trying to sound smart, funny, know what you're doing, win. Well, maybe not win. I don't think I've ever won, but you're competing as well. And especially like a lot of these podcasts, they're done by people who are professionals at this, and I'm not a professional. I mean, I might have recorded somewhere between 100 and 200 podcasts over the last 6 years, but I still think of myself as a complete beginner to it, and I'm not. I don't think of myself as like a seasoned professional. And a lot of these people are. And a lot of them are writers, and they're good at thinking on their feet. And I'm not necessarily good at thinking on my feet. So, where it all came from is wanting to try and challenge myself and to sort of learn how to do these things and to sort of face my fears. And I think it's been very successful in that, I can now stand up in front of a room of 500 people and give a talk. I've over prepared the talk, as I said, for 6 weeks, but it's something that I know I can do now. And, the podcasting like this feels fairly natural because, it's just a conversation between two people. It's not excessively, scripted or anything like that. I've got, we both have some notes that we're looking at, but it's general and we're not really going through them in any order or anything. And it's just a little light structure for the conversation, but it is a conversation. So it's,
yeah, of course.
And it's easy. This stuff is now easy to me.
See, that's fascinating to me. I would have never guessed that you got into it out of, trying to overcome, something that you struggled with, right? Like in that, it's such a cool story to hear that, that it was a good mechanism to move you from one point to another on that journey. Like that's really interesting.
Yeah. I think, there's a lot of people, if you do a talk and then you confess how nervous you were and people go, oh, you didn't seem nervous at all. I'd have never thought that. That's true of so many people. There's a lot of people out there whose content that you're listening to who, they sound so super confident and together and you think, oh, I could never be like them. And it's like, well, here's the thing. We're all just making it up. We're faking the fact that we're confident. It's like, I always think of it as sort of, it's acting in a sense. It's like you're playing a slightly more confident version of yourself on stage. And at some point, it becomes blurry as to, am I actually still acting this or am I confident or, but yeah, there's a lot of people out there that you will have no idea that they suffer from, a variety of anxiety and depression and whatever it is. And because all you see is the good parts and the polished parts and the edited parts and all this.
You talk about, or we've kind of in the back channel, your first podcast, right, was The Incomparable. So I know you've done some blogging and some writing, off and on, probably prior to that. But was on The Incomparable. It was the TV podcast. You've been, like you said, on 200-ish other shows. How did that all get started? Like, how did you get invited to the first show, or how did you invite yourself to the first show? And then how did you become a recurring guest on certain shows? We talked about Clockwise, which for those of you that don't know, Clockwise is a technology podcast where they address certain topics and they have 30 minutes to do it. And it's a hard 30 minutes to do it. And it's a panel show. So there are multiple people on the panel and you're bouncing around and everybody's kind of saying their little blurb. You've also been on panel shows where you're talking about a movie or you're talking about a TV show or you're doing a draft. Like, how did you get invited to those things? How did you invite yourself to those things? How did all that get started?
So, Jason Snell is the person who runs the Incomparable Podcast Network. And I've known Jason for something in excess of 25 years, since back in the day when he was an intern at Mac User magazine. I was talking to him, this was at the UL conference in Ireland again, and we were talking about Doctor Who, because we both like Doctor Who a lot. And he said something along the lines of, we should just do this on a podcast. And I'm like, I've never recorded anything before in my life. How does, I don't have a microphone. I don't know how to do this. And upon returning from the conference, I bought a Blue Yeti microphone, which is not what I'm currently using. I'm using an ATR 2100 USB, which is my recommended cheap podcast microphone. It's, it's like less than $100. And I think there's a new USB-C version that's come out. Anyway.
Yeah, and I'm using the Blue Yeti, so that's funny that you mentioned those two.
The Blue Yeti is a great microphone, and it's a great starter microphone. It just picks up too much background noise for me.
Yeah.
And if you're, especially as I know you're in a house with children, it's and I live in an apartment building, and there's people above and below me and stuff, and so the ATR microphone picks up a lot less sound from around you. You have to speak directly into it, but it's a and it's a good thing to start with. Anyway, that's not the point. Point is, so we were just having a chat about Doctor Who and Star Wars, over lunch, and it was like Jason said, "Oh, you should come on the podcasts." And so I think it was like the 20th episode of the TV podcast that I was on. So fairly not close to the start of The Incomparable, because The Incomparable is coming up for 10 years this August. But I was sort of in on the ground floor of the talking about Doctor Who stuff, and I did those, and it's fun. I mean, like that stuff is definitely comes under the hobby side of things. I don't make any money out of this stuff, for all the podcasting and things that I do, it's either about, it's building my profile in the Apple space. And, I always think of like, if I'm going on a tech podcast and it's like the celebrity going on the chat show, because they've got a book to sell or they've got a movie out or whatever. It's like, it's an exchange of, here is some of my time and I'm exchanging this for some visibility.
It's how I know about Peacock. If it wasn't for you coming on shows, I would not know about the program Peacock.
Yeah,
at all.
And so I'm quite happy to do all that tech podcast. I will say the word Peacock as many times as possible.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But for the Incomparable stuff, it's because I want to chat to Jason and all these people about Doctor Who or whatever it is, because it's fun. And it does come down to the working from home thing. And it's like, I might spend, my lunch hour chatting to somebody about stuff. And, I of course talk to my wife, but it's nice to have that sort of social contact that you miss as a working from home person. And that's where it started. And, I got invited on, I think, I can't remember what the first Clockwise, if that had come out of Úll as well. Úll was this conference in Ireland, and it was went to about 5 of them, and I think they may still be doing it. I didn't make it to the last one, but it was a great conference for just sort of meeting people and talking to people, and there's a lot of friendships that came out of that. Like Mike Hurley, I first got to know at Úll. As he will remind me, I say that I met him for the first time at this particular Úll, and I had in fact met him at the year previously and forgotten him. And I was basically talking to Jason. I'm like, sort of, go away, kid, stop bothering me. And I didn't do that, but we became really good friends out of the next one, and that's how I ended up on relay things. And you talked about the Total Party Kill podcast, and that came out of Mike wanting to play D&D, so getting a sort of group together of mostly UK people. Because the hardest problem with podcasts and the hardest problem with D&D is scheduling people, and that doubly so if you're doing a D&D podcast. So we got together a bunch of people, and I hadn't played D&D in 30 odd years, so it was a lot of fun before Mike was born, I should say, and it was a lot of fun to do that. And we recorded most of them last summer. And then there was a gap of like 3-4 months, and then the final ones were the episodes that are just about to appear. We recorded in December, and that's just been a great opportunity to hang out with friends, and playing D&D is a good fun thing to do.
If you'll let me fanboy for a second, right? I know nothing about D&D. Like the most I know about D&D is I work at a coffee shop that doubles as a tabletop gaming place. Mm-hmm. And there's people that come in and they do all kind of different games. So some of them will come in and they'll play Dungeons and Dragons. Some of them will come in and they'll play, the latest Star Wars tabletop game, whatever it is. I've never had a desire to play Dungeons and Dragons, right? I randomly heard about your the UK edition of Total Party Kill, and I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. Like, I'll try this and see what it's like. It's hilarious. It makes me want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it makes me want to, more than anything, it makes me want to hang out with 5 or 6 people and do a thing, not because of the thing, but because I'm going to get to hang out with these people while I do the thing. And I think that's what I love about the show is it's so much, or I guess the campaign that you're all doing, right? It's, in my mind, it's so much less about what's actually happening in the campaign, and it's so much more about you all trying to get Liz to stop making bad choices, right? Like, you're trying to get her, you're like come on, like, no, we need to do the mission, and she's like, I want to firebomb this, and I want to do this, and I want to go back and explore that thing, like, and I just love it. Like, I just think it's so funny.
Liz is definitely an agent of chaos.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, and it's. I really enjoy doing it. I hope we get to do more. And I've also been doing the Lego dioramas, which are the podcast art,
which are amazing, right? Like, if you would put out high-res images, which you may have, but if you would put out high-res images, there is a chance that some of those would end up on my wall.
Well, I mean, so I put together a poster, and I don't know what I'll do with it, but I have a poster which has got all the art, and a sort of Total Party Kill logos and stuff on it. And I don't know if anything will ever come of it, and I might just print it for myself and put it on the wall, or, at the end of the campaign, maybe I put up the high-res art or something. I do have high-res versions of everything. And I have toyed with the idea of doing something with it, because some of them I was really happy with, and some of them I thought I had to do something. And I've done like 24 or something of those, and some of them were quite elaborate, like the tree that was a few weeks ago.
Oh yeah.
That took me like 8 hours to build. And again, talk about bad uses of time, but it was fun because I like Lego.
Well, it wasn't a bad use of time for me, because I think they're fascinating. I love them.
But I just like trying to, because in each one there's Tony Sindelar, who's the DM. I've hidden him, or not really hidden, but he's in the shot of most of them. But there's also the parrot that lives in the house that he's in.
Yeah.
Is also in every shot and things like that. And it's just like I actually Jason gave me a budget to do Lego, so this is my lifelong dream, is that I'm being paid to do Lego.
So how do you all talk to each other, right? Are there platforms online that mediate you all? I guess maybe not talking to each other, because that would probably just be Skype, but is there a platform that mediates you playing online?
So for the D&D, yes. I mean, we've got there's a website called Roll20,
okay,
which lets you sort of put up a map and see your position in your tokens, your characters, and move them around and sort of get that sense. And it also can do dice rolls and stuff like that. There's also D&D Beyond, which lets you have your character sheets with all the details of your stats and stuff that the DM can look at and you can look at for reference and things. And we used Zoom for doing the recording, and we did video. There's videos available of all the recordings, which is again a weird thing, like doing video that is going to stay on the internet forever, where you're just kind of like riffing with your friends, and I had to move a whole bunch of crap from my office, from one side of the office to the other side, to make a nice sort of background for me playing, because I knew it was going to be on somebody's screen, even as a tiny thumbnail. I didn't want stacks of cardboard boxes or whatever's currently in the office.
So if anybody's interested in those videos, where are they?
I think they are linked to in the show notes for each episode. Okay. But if you go to the Incomparable website and find the actual episode page, it has the artwork and the
I didn't know that.
It has the link to the page, the video. So the videos are fun, because you'll miss out on the fact that when I was in character as my Dragonborn, I was, not only did I have a voice, because I messed around with some voice changer stuff to make me sound slightly more dragon-like, but I also had a dragon mask which I wore at various points just to amuse the other panelists.
See, and I thought that was just lost to the art of podcasting, but I didn't know there was a video. So that's awesome. I'm gonna have to go check those out. That's gotta be crazy fun.
I mean, that was one of the weird things with that, was because to backtrack slightly, one of the ways that the Incomparable makes money is that there is you can be a member, so you pay an amount per year and you get access to other stuff. And so one of the things is they do what's called the bootlegs, which are, as soon as a recording happens, the whole thing goes up with the sort of pre-podcast conversation and the post-podcast conversation on it, completely unedited, the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, and people love that. You know, people will, there's a lot of, and the members are great, but they're clamoring for the latest stuff, and they want I think a lot of podcasts, you know, if I listen to a podcast that I've been on and it's been edited and it's been edited well, it's great, because I think, wait a minute, I completely, flubbed that line, or I said something I shouldn't have said at that point, or whatever, and it all gets taken out, and it just sounds like this very smooth, slick thing. And and it's not, there's a lot of very good editors out there who are sort of trimming the fat out of these things. But there are people who love these bootleg recordings, which, I don't know if it's for the authenticity of hearing us like actual, now we are officially recording, the banter between people. But there's a just in terms of when you're talking about platforms, what I thought to mention was there's a Slack channel. There's a Slack for the Incomparable, for hosts, for organizing stuff, and we chat and hang out in there. There's also another Slack for the members, and we also hang out in there. So like the members can go into that and they can sort of have interactions with people and with each other. And that's where, like, my dice rolling app was, I took over basically the Total Party Kill Slack channel in the members Slack, and I was like posting builds to that on an almost daily basis and getting feedback, and it was being developed as we were playing D&D, because I had this sort of getting back into D&D and buying dice is always great fun, and then I sort of had this sidetrack into building this dice app. But it was, it came about because Jason said in one of the recordings, I can't believe you haven't written some D&D related app yet. And I was like, I wonder if I could do that. And I wrote the first version in 2 weeks from like hitting new project to releasing it on the App Store, and that was a very, that's not what I do normally. So it was a challenge for me to try and come up to write something, to prototype it in public with these members from the Total Party Kill group, and that was a lot of fun as a whole experience, because it touched so much stuff. I was playing D&D with my friends. I was building a D&D related app, and still am. Which is done actually surprisingly well. Which
has it? I was going to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. If it was the only app I was doing, I could not survive on it. But as a little side thing, I need to work on PCalc. PCalc is what brings in the income. But it'll keep me in dice, certainly.
Yeah, for sure.
But working on that and then doing the Lego stuff, and it's just kind of like a bunch of little creative things. And because the dice app has sold quite well, I feel financially it's all been a worthwhile amount of time invested and stuff. But for the D&D, I would gladly play D&D with these people with no recordings whatsoever, because it's just hanging out with them.
And I feel the exact same way about this show, and like what I'm doing right now is, like, I would love it to be supplemental in some way, right? Like, obviously, because it's a non-trivial, it's a significant amount of time, right? To do something and to do it well. But if it doesn't end up being like that, I'm totally fine with that because I get to talk to interesting people about a subject that I'm really excited about. So I get it. I get it completely. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think it's a factor of like we have all these friendships across the internet and we don't necessarily get to see these people as often. And, for me, it's just a way to chat to my friends. And if other people find that enjoyable as well to listen to, that's great. It surprises me. I mean, there's a friend of mine who, like a real life in Glasgow friend who watched all the Total Party Kill UK streams live when we were playing them. Like,
oh wow!
And I was like, why? And he was like, oh, I just had it on at work. Had it on in the background, and I'm like, I mean, I'm not saying bad of anyone who loves to watch these things live because I enjoy like the live recordings, as I said, of things like Upgrade and stuff. But it just surprises me I think it surprises me generally that anyone listens to anything that I do. And, when you have an interaction with somebody and they're like, oh yeah, I know all about this because, I've heard you talk about it. Best one of those, I will say. I was at WWDC a few years back. I think it was 2016. And Craig Federighi is the head of Apple's software group. So in charge of, iOS, macOS, all those things. And I saw him at the conference. I mean, this feeds back into us, seeing celebrities and whether you should go up and talk to them or not, because he's definitely, a celebrity in this community. And I was like, he's sitting watching a talk. So I'll wait till the end and, maybe I'll just say hello. So, I went up to him and talked to him and I introduced myself and I sort of started to go into, a brief spiel about who I was. And he said, oh yeah, I've heard you tell that story on a podcast. And I was like, it's like, hey, the only podcast that I can think of that I told that story on was Debug with Rene Ritchie and Guy English. And yeah. I know I talked a lot about Apple stuff on that maybe I shouldn't have said or whatever, various stories. I recommend anyone who's interested find that episode of Debug that I was on because it's got some good stories on it. But the fact that he had listened to it and knew who I was just like very worrying, terrifying, whatever. And occasionally, you'll have interactions with people and they will know more about you than you think that they know about you. Yeah. And that's it's kind of nice in a way and it's kind of strange in a way because I never record podcasts thinking that anyone's listening to them.
Well, and especially, and that's what makes the medium so awesome is especially if I listen across your different shows, right? Because I've heard you on quite a few different avenues and different venues. You get a really interesting, I'm not going to say accurate, but you get a really interesting and potentially like a somewhat full picture of a person. Again, that might be accurate or it might not be, but it goes back to your point that you made earlier. It's like, I feel like I kind of know you, even though we don't know anything about each other than what you've said through various shows. But I have this picture of you, and then here you are. You're like, yeah, I just, this guy sent me a message on Twitter, and I responded. It's so interesting how when you aggregate things, you get this picture of a person via what they've said or what they've shown or what who their personality is on the internet.
Yeah, and I kind of you always think, I hope that I have not said anything in a podcast. I always have this worry, like I've never recorded a podcast. I mean, I don't think I've said anything on this one, but occasionally I'll go back to somebody and it's like, can you take out that bit where I said this? Because that sounded bad. When I was thinking back on what I said, I sounded like a real jerk. and so there is a certain amount of editing, and maybe you're getting a curated view of what somebody's like. But I try, I don't generally do that I am aware of. But because, as I say, I don't think about it. I don't think about the audience. Not that I like want to do a bad job, because you want to be entertaining and you want to whatever. But I think if you start to think about it in terms of that, of pleasing an audience specifically or pandering to an audience or whatever, you're trying to kind of change the content or something like that. So yeah, I think the best podcasts are, just like friends talking to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if you were going to make a show, right. And it doesn't have to be a podcast. You could be a YouTube channel. You could be actually start a full-fledged blog. What would you do? What would the content be? What way would you want to make this show?
It's a difficult one. I mean, the obvious answer, I guess, is to do something related to development. I could do something where I like live streamed my actual work. I would never do that because I think that's terrifying. I mean, this comes back to the whole kind of social anxiety thing, but also I mess up a lot when I'm working. It's like, I'll spend 2 hours on something and I'll realize, that doesn't work at all. Like I've gone down this blind alley, or I'm writing something not in the best possible way, and I feel that if somebody who knows what they're actually talking about watched it, they'd go, this comes down to also a bit of imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's something that I've definitely struggled with as well.
But they would never say anything on Twitter. Like they would never, ever, like call you out on Twitter ever.
No, but
I'm kidding. It's sarcasm.
But it's the I don't know, like people who like live stream them making art or something. Like I've seen some comic book artists do that kind of thing. That kind of like having the internet in the room as you're working, just I don't know how well that would work for me, because I think one of the things that's nice about if you're doing live streams and stuff is if you can actually interact with the audience. But if, as I said, I can't listen to even a podcast, having somebody like a stream of messages at the side of my screen as I'm trying to work, that would kind of like destroy any productivity I had. But something in the developer space, I guess, is where my main competency is. So that's kind of what I would do. But what, I don't know. And the thing is, there are plenty of good developer podcasts, especially in the Apple space, things like Under the Radar. And so I'm not sure that I could particularly add anything new, which is one of the reasons why I don't really have my own podcast, and I'm just happy to be the perennial guest, because it's much less pressure. I don't have to do something every week or on a certain schedule. I just turn up, do my bit, leave. Then somebody else does the editing, somebody else does the promotion, somebody else does everything else. And, I get to sort of wash my hands of the whole thing and just walk away as soon as I stop recording.
Okay, you've brought this up a couple of times. You think the shows that are often enjoyable to listen to are just friends talking, right?
Yeah.
So who would you talk to? I'm going to make you sit down every week and talk to a friend or somebody on the internet. Who are you going to talk to?
So I would say Mike Hurley. He's a good friend, and I don't get to spend enough time talking to him, but he has so many shows already. It's never going to ever happen. And I don't know what we would talk about. I've been on Upgrade as a guest twice, and I've been on a number of shows with Mike. I really like Mike. He's a good friend. So that would be my choice, but it is not. And there is a certain amount of the two white guys talk about something on a podcast is like, do you need to bring more of that into the world as a regular podcast? I'm not sure I need to, but I really like to talk to Mike.
I think you're underselling something though, right? And I'm going to speak from a completely, I don't know if ignorance is the right word, but a completely American perspective here. You both have accents, right? So therefore, when you add the accent in, you could really talk about anything, and people are going to be like, wow, that is really cool. That is really interesting, right? Just because it's new and it's novel and it's just fun. So
Yeah, I mean, I've heard before that people like the accents, and I think that's one reason why Total Party Kill UK has caught on a bit. But then in another way, it's like, wait, so it's just the accent you like, and it's nothing to do with like what we're actually saying or anything.
oh no, that's not true. But I'll tell you what, the accent doesn't hurt you.
I mean, it's like, I because we're surrounded by various accents in this country, and up and down the UK we all have quite different accents, and I don't sound particularly Scottish. Like in Scotland I'm sort of like halfway Scottish English, so in Scotland I sound English and in England I sound Scottish.
Okay.
But like, so Liz has got a much stronger Scottish accent.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And there's a wide variety of accents here, and mine is kind of modulated because my mom grew up in the south of England, so I've got a bit of her accent in there, and my dad grew up in Glasgow, so I'm a mix, but I think it means that I also am the more understandable end of the Scottish accent. Because I believe like the film Trainspotting got subtitled in the US, which I find offensive on many levels.
Yes, and it was probably necessary.
Yeah, probably. A very thick Glaswegian accent can be hard to navigate.
So we have the same thing here, right? Like I'm from originally southwestern Pennsylvania, and we say different words. So a rubber band, in where I'm from, we call it a gum band.
Right.
Soda is pop. So we have different words for it, and we also have an accent. So people will ask me, they'll be like, "Where are you from? Like what's your region or whatever?" And then my wife is from Texas, right? So she's y'all and that southern, a little bit of a southern draw. It's funny how the different regions bring out different inflections and different accents in people's voices.
Yeah, I shall plug, there's another podcast on The Incomparable called Pants in the Boot, and it's by Glenn Fleischman, and it's basically about differences between UK and US language, and also sometimes, because there's a lot of UK panelists on it, between different areas of the UK. And there's a lot of silly stories and stuff on that, and each episode is like sort of 10-20 minutes at most, because they generally, when we've done it, we've recorded like a batch of them over an hour or two, and then it gets cut up into separate episodes.
Great, we'll have to check it out. All right, so as you've made shows, right, you've said you've made upwards of 200. What are the challenges? Like, you've talked about the pros of it, right? So there's pros to you socially, there's pros to you from a personal development standpoint, there's pros to you from a business standpoint. What are the challenges? Like, what do you find hard about doing things where you put content onto the internet?
I think the hardest, so it's easier if you don't think about it, and you just do it. It becomes quite hard if you actually start to think about the fact that the people are listening to it. That's hard from my perspective. I think the hardest podcast that I did was we did a TV podcast about Daredevil, and I did a couple of seasons of that, and it's always fun talking to Mose, but it was a case of, it starts to be, you start to think about it differently, and then it's like, well, I need to sit down and watch the episode, and I probably need to watch it a second time while making notes. So
yeah, we'll take a note.
There's a couple of hours there, and you have to do a certain amount of prep and look up background on things, and it is work, and it is you can start to resent things, not that I did really on that, but just like if I was doing something on a weekly basis, and I think you're doing the hardest podcast, which is you're doing a guest-based podcast. So you have to find a guest every week or however frequently you're putting these out. And that is, so you're starting new with somebody, starting from scratch basically every episode. So you're not building up the same kind of, like, if you have the camaraderie of talking to the same person. And you might not necessarily know all the people that you're talking to. So, you know, you've picked like the hardest thing to do as your podcast. So
Thanks, James.
well,
Thanks.
I'm bringing the tough love here.
Yeah.
But you know, I think it's also an interesting thing to do, because like the debug podcast was a fascinating thing, because you have on all these developers and you get, you know, like podcasts which are 2 hours or more long, talking about various things. So you get a really good insight into stuff. Because, you know, some podcasts like Clockwise, it works well that they're 30 minutes and it's fixed or whatever. And some podcasts I listen to, you know, they'll go on for hours, which is why I don't have as many opportunities to listen to different podcasts. You know, it's like, I don't know what the typical ATP runtime is at the moment, but it's quite long. And
it's got to be 2+.
And, you know, John Gruber's talk show is, you know, similarly can run 2 hours or whatever. And it's like, if you're listening to that, you know, in half-hour chunks in the shower or whatever, that's quite a few showers.
One of the things I find the most challenging, it's not talking. Like, I agree. Like, the setup of the podcast, getting the recordings well, like done well, actually talking to you, that stuff's fine. The biggest challenge I have is getting in front of people, right? Because I'm a nobody, and I'm trying to build a brand, and I'm trying to build a reputation with people to where when I send an email or when I send a tweet or, you know, try to connect with somebody, it's not just some random noise that comes into somebody's, you know, system, and they don't have time, right? Understandably, like I'm not even judging them for it. They don't have time for that. That's the hardest part, right? And then you get into the whole scheduling thing, and you get into whole, you know, all that stuff. But that is also the most fun, or that's one of the most fun things to me, is everybody that comes on has a different perspective. Everybody that comes on has different motivations for what they do, and everybody that comes on has different stories that they get to tell, and that I get to listen to. So it's like the blessing and the curse of, if I can get in front of you, it's going to be awesome. And it might take me a while to get in front of you. You know what I mean? Like, and it's a good and a bad. All right. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Yeah. I no pressure, you know.
No pressure, but all the pressure.
Okay.
So there's no pressure, but there's all the pressure. Okay. You don't know these questions.
Nope.
Which is what makes this fun. You need to try to answer these as fast as possible and as concise as possible. And I'd like to say that you have a minute to do all the lightning round questions. What I'll tell you is Jason Snell took way longer than a minute. So, you know, my requirement on that is pretty loose, but here we go.
Okay.
Overall, what is your favorite content on the internet?
Oh, that's a very open question.
Yes, it is.
My favorite content on the internet, probably it is going to be podcasts. It is not going to be podcasts in the tech space. I mean, if we can discount things like Netflix as being content on the internet, because I don't think it is. It's just television.
I agree.
If we're talking things like this, I listen to a lot of video game related podcasts, because I like to listen to something that is not in the space that I work in, because, you know, I want hobbies that are not necessarily, you know, being mined for content and things like that. There's the podcast that I look forward to the most is one called Waypoint Radio, which is a Vice podcast about video games. And it has a number of people on it that I've followed for years. And I even emailed them at one point, and one of them said, "Oh, you're the Peek Out guy." And I was like, wow, you know, because it's like the game space is interesting to me because it's a parallel to the Mac develop or the Apple developer space. Like the conference was in Moscone, where Apple's conference was for many years, and there's a lot of the press are based around San Francisco. And so if you listen to the podcast, they're talking about a lot of things that I know about, but it's like, I know lots of people in the Mac press, but I don't know anybody in the gaming press. But those are the kind of the people that I listen to and have that, I really want to be your friend. I know I'm never going to be your friend, but, you know, what if I wrote a video game and then somehow I got to talk to you at a conference, and that would be really cool. So yeah, it's that stuff that I like the most, is sort of listening to the talk around video games. It's like not necessarily about the games themselves, but just talk about the industry. And the Waypoint is a very political podcast as well,
Okay.
where they talk about things like say labor issues in video games, about unionization and about things like that, about things that you may not think about if you're just playing a game. And the fact crunch is a big problem in both the tech world and the games world, in terms of burnout and things like that. So it's interesting to hear from a different perspective, which is related to things but not necessarily about the about your particular area. And I think that we're way over a minute, but yes, that's the kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that I like.
Okay, good. Next one. Right. Notice the lightning round is less lightning and more interesting. All right, our favorite podcast, your favorite personality on the internet. So not friend, not somebody that you co-host with. General personality. Who's your favorite personality on the internet?
It's difficult because I've definitely had people who I have enjoyed their work on the internet that I have somehow turned that into a friendship by stalking them at conferences, and until they finally admit that we're friends. So, I'm gonna say that this is cheating again, but I'm gonna say Austin Walker off the Waypoint Radio podcast. He is a really cool guy, and he does a D&D podcast as well, and a bunch of other stuff. He is somebody that I would really like to know, and so he counts as my favorite.
Awesome. Is there a show, a creator, or content that's on the rise, right? Like, it's not established, it's not well developed. Well developed is the wrong way to put it, but it's not established, it's not very popular necessarily, but it's coming up, and you think everybody should listen to it?
This is hard because I so rarely add new shows. Because the stuff that I've been listening to for years, and I rarely stop listening to shows. I mean, it happens, but sometimes through time pressure, I don't get to every episode of things. But there's some that I go that, I feel that I've grown up and perhaps the presenters haven't. And I eventually, get to a point where I'm like, I'm kind of done with this. But it's so rare for me to actually add a show, because it's like a new show is commitment. It's like adding to the virtual. I've got these piles of books, I think everybody does, piles of books that they haven't read, and, they're mean to get round to, and adding more virtual versions of that, of the stress of another thing piling up, means I don't get into new stuff as often as I should. And, if you're listening to the same podcast for 10 years or something, maybe there is an argument that you should be listening to new voices and whatever. But I'm bad at it. So nothing immediately springs to mind. I'm going to say, just as a podcast that I enjoy, that I have been on, that is not well known, Most Important Meal, which is a podcast notionally about breakfast, by Brian Hamilton.
I agree completely. That is the most important meal.
It's Brian Hamilton and Truge. And you should listen to that, because it's just fun people talking about breakfast.
You're only allowed to do one show. Which one do you choose?
And this is one, like, across everything that I've ever recorded.
Across everything that you've ever done, you're only allowed to choose one of those.
The show that feels the closest to being my show, and it's not my show by any means, is The Rebound, which is a tech podcast with Dan Morin, John Maltz, and Lex Friedman. And Lex is a busy man and is often away doing other things, or is on a cruise, or is he's away a lot. So I fill in for Lex. So I'm kind of his understudy on that podcast.
Okay.
And I'm also available, which I think is like the key thing to me being on lots of podcasts is that if somebody messages me and says, "Can you be on a podcast in an hour?" I'm like, sure. You know. And the Rebound is just, 3 people generally talking about tech stories of the week. And it requires very little preparation because it's all stuff that we know about, and it's just 3 people having a fun conversation. It's a podcast that I enjoy doing, and I would like to be a regular on that. To go from semi-regular to regular. And if I only had to do one, I think it would be that one.
Okay. And then last question, last in the lightning round. What is your favorite non-developer or non-talking to the internet activity?
I guess my 2 hobbies come down to going to the cinema, which I enjoy doing a lot, and seeing all manner of, random things and finding sort of stuff that might not be as well known or popular or whatever. And, I fall down various rabbit holes of like Hong Kong cinema or Korean cinema or whatever it is, Bollywood. I really love Bollywood films. And, finding stuff that is not necessarily known to a Western mainstream audience. But, if you look at the sort of the different film industries around the world, there's a lot of bad stuff gets produced, but there's a lot of really good stuff gets produced that, people don't see. And so, with something like Parasite winning Best Oscar, people are like, "Oh, South Korean cinema, you say?" And it's like, and I'm like, yes, I have been watching these films for like 20 years. But, I'm glad that other people are finally discovering some of these directors and stars and stuff. So that's interesting. And video games is something that I do a lot of, more than I should. I tweeted something the other day, and it's like about, I have never enough time to read all these, books and watch all these TV shows and all this. And, and then I start a 120-hour video game, which I just did in that I was just playing through Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which was enormous fun. And I really enjoyed it. My downtime sometimes of late has been actually doing the Dice app, because I kind of consider that my hobby project. But, you should try and do things that are not your day job for your break, so that you can actually unwind. So video games I enjoy, and cinema. I mean, the thing with video games is that it does engage your brain, but cinema, you can just sit there and you can relax and you can just sort of take in a story.
So it's funny that you mentioned the Dice app at the end, because my last question in the lightning round, which I was going to let go because of time, was literally a Dice app. Right, because we've talked about it a little bit, so I was gonna let it go, but it's like I just find it so interesting that I'm getting into this thing, I'm doing this thing. Why isn't there a Dice app? Oh, I should make a Dice app. I'm gonna make a Dice app. Now there's a Dice app out there that people can buy. So
I mean, the thing is, there are tons of Dice apps.
Are there? Okay.
There wasn't a shortage of Dice apps. It was Jason challenged me, which was part of it, or at least did the, "Why have you never done this?" And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. But it was most of the me writing apps is because I want to learn something, and I want to learn something new. And you touched on it briefly about there being a hidden game in the about screen of pCalc, my calculator. And that's because I wanted to learn about 3D graphics. I did some of it at university. I've got a degree in computing science, but I'd not really used much of that knowledge. So I wanted to kind of learn about doing 3D graphics, and the Dice app, or pCalc was me learning about how to program the Mac. That's where it came from. It was my first ever program that I wrote, full stop. And the Dice app, it's a small thing, so I can kind of change large chunks of it, and I can do things like there's a Mac port using this technology Catalyst, and I've been learning about concepts of 3D graphics and learning about a variety of things. And the game stuff was this too, was kind of, I think like one of the things is people talk about AR being something that's going to be big in the future. You know, there's all these rumors of Apple are going to have AR glasses, and maybe, you know, augmented reality is going to be the next big thing. You know, we're all going to not be running around with phones. We're going to be running around with some device projecting things onto our optical nerves. And that's, you know, that's going to be the next paradigm shift in computing. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's possible. But a lot of that stuff is based around 3D graphics. And I wanted to learn about AR, and I wanted to learn about 3D graphics because this could be something that will be useful in the next decade for what I'm doing. So the Dice app is a silly thing, but a lot of the stuff that I've been doing in it is like, how do I do this? How do I solve this problem? This is not something I've ever done before. And that, you know, it's like, yes, you're just rolling dice around a screen, but there was things I was trying to solve which got me into doing GPU based image processing, which is something that I've never touched before. And it's like, how do I do this? You know, basically the equivalent of running sort of Photoshop filters across an image to make a new image. And I'm like, I can do this. I can run this on the GPU. It runs really fast. And, you know, this is a whole area of development I've never touched before. And writing little pieces of code which run on the graphics processor, you know, that's something that I've never done. So all of this is just, it's a way for me to learn, but it's also a fun little toy. Yeah. And, you know, if I'm like feeling down or whatever, just like coming up with a new texture set for a dice, you know, designing a new little dice set, that's a lot of fun. And so I can like spend half an hour doing that or you know, work on something else. And a lot of code, like the about screen and the dice app, is sometimes it's in response to, like, for example, depression or you know, the state of the world, or, you know, as we said, politics is not great right now, and it's nice to have something that I can, you know, put some creative energies into, distract myself from things. You know, like we talked about the coronavirus, and, you know, who knows what the next 6 months of our lives, or, you know, rest of our lives are going to look like at this point when we're recording. And I can see a lot of people who are now going to be working from home and going to need creative outlets into things. So, you know, maybe we'll have a sort of boon in internet creativity over the next years as a result of this.
Very, very interesting. James, I thank you so much for your time. I thank you so much for your generosity, talking to us and being on the show. I thank you for talking to the internet, right? I mean, you do it a lot. You do it in a lot of different places, and you bring a unique perspective because you don't, like you've admitted, you don't own any of the shows, but you come in and you go and you add a lot of value, and just hearing your story has been great. So I want to thank you very much. I want to tell everybody out there, go check out PCalc, download, buy, go check out Dice for PCalc if that's in your wheelhouse, if you need a Dice app. Thanks, James. I appreciate it.
It's been great talking, and we had an hour slot, and I just see that we've gone to 2 hours. So I hope that whoever listens to this has listened. If anyone has listened to the end, then thank you very much for putting up with me.
No, not at all. It's been a true pleasure. So thanks, and we'll see you guys next time.